Now, the United Nations Security Council held an open debate on leadership for peace to focus on promoting multilateralism to help achieve peace across the globe. Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the wars in Ukraine, Gaza and Sudan are undermining the legitimacy and effectiveness of the Security Council. He said the Pact for Peace will help strengthen multilateralism and strengthen the Security Council as well. Secretary General said the pact sends a clear message to the warring parties that all members of this council, including the 5 permanent members, will not tolerate the horrific violence and desperate humanitarian crisis being unleashed on innocent civilians.
Gaza to Ukraine to Sudan and beyond, wars green dawn, suffering grows, anger deepens, lives are upended, and legitimacy and effectiveness of the United Nations and this Council are undermined. Leadership for peace means all member states living up to their commitments in the UN Charter, in international law, and in recent agreements such as the Pact for the Future. Among other things, the Pact calls for strengthening tools and frameworks to prevent conflict, sustain peace, and advance sustainable development with the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women. Leadership for peace means ensuring that the UN Security Council acts in a meaningful way to ease global tensions and help address the conflicts that are inflicting so much suffering around the world. Geopolitical divisions continue to block effective solutions. A united council can make a tremendous difference for peace. A divided council cannot. When you consider the most difficult and intractable conflicts on this council agenda, peace can seem an impossible dream. But I strongly believe that peace is possible if we stick to principles. Peace in Ukraine is possible by following the UN Charter and abiding by international law. Peace in Gaza is possible by sparing no efforts for an immediate ceasefire, the immediate release of all hostages, and the beginning of an irreversible process towards a two-state solution. Peace in Sudan is possible by sending a clear message to the warring parties that all members of this Council, including the 5 permanent members, will not tolerate the horrific violence and desperate humanitarian crisis being unleashed on innocent civilians.
And for the very latest, let's cross live to New York and speak to Arise international correspondent Femi Akinsanya. Great to see you, Femi, once again. Now, tell us, what are the issues dominating discussions today, the day 3 of the session, the United Nations General Assembly?
I'm sure you can't see me just yet, but I can hear you. But I can definitely hear you. Welcome to the world of international journalism. So we are stood outside, well rather inside the Global Africa Business Initiative Unstoppable Africa event. This is day 2, and just now the Director General of the World Trade Organization, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, has just come off stage. So when you came to me, I was in the middle of trying to grab her and bring her back onto set. So forgive me, I'm still with you, I'm still answering questions, but I will be looking over my shoulder just to see if I can skedaddle over. But go ahead, ask your question.
All right, so I was asking, I asked you earlier, what are the issues dominating discussions today?
Oh, I only caught the tail end of your question just then, Georgina, but I'm guessing you're asking about the updates from today. Well, definitely, let's start here with, first and foremost, the topic of discussion today here at the Unstoppable Africa event is looking at ways to identify the best channels for development across the continent. The main tenets of discussion here are looking at things like creative economy, sport, trade, also energy access. And so for over the course of 2 days, what we have been hearing is conversations from different entities, government officials, former governments, leaders of international institutions, being able to devise their ideas for how best to devise a plan that would allow Africa to continue excelling, continue moving in the right direction. Just on stage, as I said, was the Director General of the World Trade Organization, and just before she went on stage, we had former Vice President Professor Yemi Osibajo also take to the stage to talk about both of their experiences when it comes to dealing with Nigeria, dealing with corporate entities, but also dealing with governance in the country and what they experience. Both people, Professor Osinbajo and Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, of course, have both served in Nigeria's federal government and now no longer do so. So it was rather very interesting to hear their perspectives, their experience on governing Nigeria and understanding which pockets and which parts of these pillars are most important. So that's what we're seeing on stage today. I am again still quite optimistic that we'll be able to speak to someone on camera, but as you can imagine, it's a very, very busy event, hundreds of people here, and we are trying our hardest to get the best guests to you. But staying with the General Assembly itself, there's definitely been a lot of conversation amongst African leaders. 2 days ago, you had Nigerian President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's remarks at the general debate. He was, of course, those remarks were, of course, delivered by the Vice President. And after the Vice President, you had the President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, and also Nana Akufo-Addo, the Ghanaian President. All of these African leaders discussing how they would desire an overhaul of the UN Security Council as it stands now. There's no prizes for guessing why that is. All of them have been discussing the fact that they believe African countries, or at least one African country, should get a seat at the table, should get a permanent seat. Now, the the countries that are sitting on the UN Security Council now, the likes of the United Kingdom, United States, Russia, and the like, they've all enjoyed the privilege and the power of being on the Security Council, and they all also have veto powers. So what is being suggested here is that should an African country, because there are two spaces that people have been calling for, one that may go to an African country and perhaps one to a Latin American country, but what the discussion is that if they do allow these seats to be occupied by an African country and another country, preferably in the developing world, they would not have the same powers, they wouldn't have the same veto access. So again, that makes people very uncomfortable, because not only are African countries being excluded from the UN Security Council at a time where they need it the most, even if they are allowed onto there, already there's issues of inequality and a separation between the developed world and the global south. And I can't imagine that that is something the United Nations should want to perpetuate. So it's still very, very much a source of contention amongst African leaders. We will also be expecting Kenyan President William Ruto to be taken to the stage later on. And it will be interesting to see whether or not he will discuss the United Nations and the Security Council, saying that I mentioned that because Kenya is quite significant. Just a few days ago, Kenya approved the deployment. They sent close to 600 police officers into Haiti, taking the total number of police officers in the country towards and over the 1,000 threshold. And what they're trying to do, Kenya, is establish a fully fledged United Nations peacekeeping mission. And they can't do that without the UN Security Council approving it. And the UN Security Council, of course, are meeting, but also is supposed to be meeting on this specific issue towards the end of the month. And it will again be interesting to see how they decide, whether or not they decide to approve this peacekeeping attempt by Kenya, or whether or not they don't do so. But the issue here is that that conversation, if things remain the same, will be about Africa, be about a Caribbean nation or a South American nation, but not have any representation in that room. And African leaders and many of their supporters say that just isn't fair, and it isn't becoming of a truly united nations.
Indeed, I agree with that particular point. But let's talk about the United Nations Security Council open debate on leadership for peace. And this particular discussion was focused on promoting multilateralism to help achieve peace across the globe. Like you've rightly mentioned, the issues in the Middle East as well as in Africa, Sudan. What are the takeaways from all this discussion regarding that?
You asked me about the Middle East, Georgina. So yes, what we're looking at is the issues when it comes to, of course, Israel and what they've been able to perpetuate across the Middle East. We already know that ever since October 7th, Israel has been in an extended exchange of fire with militants that they say on the other side in Palestine, in Gaza, targets that they say are Hamas targets after the atrocities that Hamas perpetuated on the Israeli populations at that film festival, music festival back in October. So ever since then, the latest iteration of this conflict has been Israel and its bombardment of Gaza. They say that they're trying to flush out Hamas militants. They say they're trying to rescue Israeli hostages, but what they've been doing as a byproduct of that action is killing civilians. It's tantamount, many people have said, to a genocide. And again, the severity of this situation continues to escalate and spill out into other countries, which is exactly what we're seeing between Israel and Lebanon. Just 2 days ago, the reports came out that an Israeli strike hit Lebanon, killing nearly 500 people. It is the single most deadly attack in this latest iteration of the conflict between Israel and Lebanon, or rather Israel and specifically Hezbollah. And it's only getting tenser. Just yesterday, there were already reports that Israel had deployed and told their soldiers to prepare for a ground invasion of Lebanon. That is yet to happen as it stands now, but you can imagine just how tense this is happening, just how tense a time it is. And then also understand that this is happening against the backdrop of the United Nations, against the backdrop of many meetings focused on the theme of maintaining international peace. And clearly, the irony is not lost on any of us when we can see that there is so much conflict going on in the Middle East, and clearly, really no end in sight. We did see that the UN ambassador, the Israeli ambassador to the UN, spoke to journalists yesterday too, spoke quite candidly, and he also fielded very candid questions, many of them asking why he is not listening to the United States, why he's not listening to the United Kingdom if they are imploring Israel to take a step back from the brink of war, why it is that they are continuing on their bombardment and escalating the issue rather than coming to an agreement or at least being able to facilitate some form of a ceasefire. That being said, I mean, again, irony is going to be a consistent theme here, because as much as the United Kingdom, the United States and any other international ally, or perhaps even NATO as an organization, can implore Israel to stop and to calm itself down, if they're continuing to supply Israel with the military support, with the weaponry support, it's giving with one hand and then saying you're going to take with the other, but you're not actually doing it. So again, it's a question about how serious these countries are, how serious the United Nations is about maintaining peace in the Middle East. If they are committed to that, whether or not it's an all-out ceasefire as it pertains to Israel and Lebanon, or even Israel and Hamas, whether the avenue to that is perpetuating and promoting a two-state solution or otherwise, something needs to change, and it has to change quickly, because as we've continued to see, these tensions are only escalating and the victims of this story are only becoming more and more vulnerable.
Yes, indeed. Well done, Adefemi. Let me release you to go see if you could speak with Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. Many thanks for your update today. Thank you.